Margaret Dawson was a woman who took her responsibilities very seriously. As the newly elected president of the Hillside Oaks Homeowners Association, or HOA, she had made it her mission to keep the neighborhood running smoothly. She believed that rules were there for a reason, and without them everything would fall into chaos. Every morning, Margaret walked through the streets of Hillside Oaks, clipboard in hand, making sure everyone followed the guidelines set by the HOA. From overgrown lawns to improperly parked cars, nothing escaped her watchful eye. Hillside Oaks was the kind of place where people liked things neat and tidy. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable. The houses were all similar in design, painted in soft colors like beige, cream, and light blue. Trees lined the sidewalks, and flowers bloomed in almost every garden. It was peaceful, quiet, and predictable. Exactly how Margaret liked it. Most of the residents appreciated her efforts, though some found her a bit too strict. But Margaret didn't care about being liked. She cared about doing her job right. On this particular afternoon, Margaret decided to do her usual rounds. She put on her favorite pair of walking shoes, grabbed her clipboard, and headed outside. The sun was shining brightly, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees. Everything seemed perfect, just as it should be. Margaret smiled to herself as she passed Mrs. Harper's house. Linda Harper was sitting on her porch with her dog Max, a golden retriever who wagged his tail enthusiastically whenever he saw Margaret. "Good afternoon, Margaret," Linda said, waving. "How's the neighborhood today?" "So far, so good," Margaret replied, stopping for a moment. "No broken fences, no loud music, no unruly pets, just the way I like it." Linda chuckled. "You're always so thorough. I don't know how you do it." "It's not hard," Margaret said with a shrug. "You just have to pay attention. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check the rest of the street." She continued down the road, nodding politely at neighbors who waved or called out greetings. Everyone knew Margaret Dawson, and while some might have found her constant vigilance annoying, most respected her dedication. After all, Hillside Oaks was a nice place to live because of people like her. As she turned the corner onto Maple Lane, something caught her eye. Parked near the entrance of the development was a car that didn't belong. It was a sleek black Dodge Charger, its shiny surface gleaming under the sunlight. The windows were tinted, giving it an air of mystery. Margaret slowed her pace and approached the vehicle cautiously. There was no permit sticker on the windshield, which meant it wasn't registered to any resident. That alone was enough to raise her suspicions. Margaret circled the car slowly, inspecting it from every angle. It looked expensive, far fancier than anything most people in Hillside Oaks could afford. Whoever owned this car clearly didn't live here. She frowned, tapping her pen against her clipboard. This was exactly the kind of thing she hated. Outsiders, coming in and disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. Just then, Linda Harper appeared again, this time walking Max along the sidewalk. When she saw Margaret standing by the Charger, she stopped. "What's going on?" Linda asked curiously. "This car," Margaret said, pointing at it. "It doesn't belong here. No permit, no registration. Do you know anything about it?" Linda shook her head. "I've never seen it before, but earlier today I did notice some people filming something down by the park. Maybe it has something to do with that?" "Filming?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. She hadn't heard anything about a film crew coming to Hillside Oaks. If they were shooting a movie or even a commercial, they should have notified the HOA beforehand. This was private property after all. Still, she supposed it was possible. Sometimes amateur filmmakers came to neighborhoods like this thinking it would add authenticity to their projects. "Well, whatever it is, they can't just leave their car here," Margaret said firmly. "It's blocking traffic and it's not allowed. I'll have to call someone to tow it." Linda nodded sympathetically. "I understand. You're just doing your job. But maybe double-check with the HOA office first? Just in case," Margaret sighed. "Fine, I'll make a quick call, but if no one knows anything about it, the car's getting towed." She pulled out her phone and dialed the number for the HOA office. After a brief conversation with the secretary, she confirmed that no one had requested permission to film in the area. nor had anyone mentioned bringing in a vehicle like this. Satisfied that she was within her rights, Margaret hung up and dialed another number, the local towing company. Frank Miller, the owner of the towing service, answered on the second ring. He and Margaret had worked together many times before, and he knew exactly why she was calling. "Another abandoned car?" Frank asked, his voice amused. "Something like that," Margaret replied. "It's a black Dodge Charger parked near the entrance of Hillside Oaks. No permit, no registration. Can you send someone over to take care of it?" "Sure thing," Frank said. "I'll get my guys on it right away." True to his word, Frank's team arrived within minutes. Two burly men hopped out of the tow truck and quickly hooked up the Charger. Margaret watched as they secured the car and prepared to drive away. She felt a small sense of satisfaction, knowing she'd done her part to maintain order in the neighborhood. But as the tow truck disappeared down the road, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation was off. The car had been too nice, too out of place. And what about the filming Linda had mentioned? Could there really be a connection? For now, though, she pushed those thoughts aside. She had done what needed to be done, and that was all that mattered. Little did Margaret know, her decision to tow the mysterious black Charger would soon lead to consequences far beyond anything she could have imagined. Margaret Dawson returned to her daily routine after the tow truck drove off with the mysterious black Charger. She felt confident that she had handled the situation properly. Rules were rules, and the car didn't belong in Hillside Oaks without proper authorization. Still, as she walked back home, something nagged at the back of her mind. The car had been so unusual, so out of place. Why would someone park it there without permission? And what about the filming Linda Harper had mentioned? Margaret tried to push those thoughts away, convincing herself that everything was fine. Later that evening, as Margaret sat in her living room going over some HOA paperwork, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find two men standing on her porch. One was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit, while the other was shorter, with a clipboard tucked under his arm. Both looked serious, their expressions unreadable. "Good evening," the taller man said, flashing a badge. "I'm Detective Alan Brooks, and this is my colleague, Officer Ryan Cole. Are you Margaret Dawson?" Margaret's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, I am. Is everything okay?" "We're here regarding a vehicle that was towed earlier today, a black Dodge Charger parked near the entrance of Hillside Oaks. Do you know anything about that?" Detective Brooks asked calmly. Margaret nodded, though she suddenly felt uneasy. "Yes, I called the towing company myself. The car didn't have a permit and it wasn't registered to any resident. I thought it was abandoned or left there illegally." Detective Brooks exchanged a glance with Officer Cole before speaking again. "Ms. Dawson, that car wasn't abandoned. It belongs to a film production crew working on a movie nearby. They loaned it from the police department for use in the filming. Unfortunately, it seems there was a misunderstanding." Margaret's face turned pale. "Wait, a police vehicle? For a movie? No one told me anything about that." "It appears there was a miscommunication," Detective Brooks said, his tone firm but not unkind. "The crew parked the car temporarily while they took a break. They didn't expect it to be towed. This vehicle is critical to the production and we need it back immediately." Margaret felt her stomach drop. She had never imagined something like this could happen. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she stammered, I had no idea. I was just doing my job. I'll do whatever I can to fix this." Detective Brooks gave her a small nod. "We understand, Ms. Dawson. But time is of the essence. The crew needs the car back by tomorrow morning for an important scene. If we don't resolve this quickly, it could cause significant delays for the production." Margaret's mind raced. She knew she had to act fast. "I'll call the towing company right now and see where the car is. I promise I'll get it sorted out." The detective handed her a business card. "Please keep us updated. And if you run into any issues, don't hesitate to reach out." After they left, Margaret closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. She couldn't believe what had just happened. A police car used for a movie? How was she supposed to know something like that? Shaking her head, she picked up the phone and dialed Frank Miller's number. Frank answered on the second ring. "Hey, Margaret, what's up?" "Frank, It's about that car I had you tow earlier, the black Charger. Do you still have it? Margaret asked anxiously. Yeah, it's here at the lot, Frank replied. Why? Something wrong? Wrong? Yes, something's very wrong, Margaret said, her voice rising slightly. That car belongs to a film crew. Apparently it's being used for a movie, and it's a police vehicle. They need it back urgently. Can you release it tonight? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Margaret, you know I can't just hand over cars willy-nilly. I need proper documentation first. What if someone claims it later? I could get into trouble. Margaret groaned inwardly. Of course Frank would be cautious, it was part of why she trusted him. But this was different. Frank, please. This isn't just some random car, it's for a major film production, and they really need it back. I'll handle the paperwork myself if I have to. I'm sorry, Margaret, Frank said firmly. Rules are rules. Until I get something official from the owners or the authorities, the car stays here. Frustrated but knowing he wouldn't budge, Margaret thanked him and hung up. She sank onto the couch, running a hand through her hair. What was she going to do now? The clock was ticking, and she needed to find a solution fast. Determined not to give up, Margaret decided to contact the film crew directly. She searched online for information about the production and eventually found an email address listed on a local news article about the movie. With trembling fingers, she typed out a message explaining the situation and apologizing profusely. She included her phone number and asked them to call her as soon as possible. As she waited for a response, Margaret began pacing around her house. Her mind replayed the events of the day, each moment making her feel worse than the last. How could she have made such a huge mistake? She prided herself on being thorough, on paying attention to details. Yet here she was, caught in the middle of a disaster. Her teenage nephew, Kyle Peterson, who often stayed with her during weekends, walked into the living room carrying a bowl of popcorn. He was a tech-savvy kid who loved tinkling with computers and social media. Seeing his aunt looking stressed, he raised an eyebrow. What's going on? You look like you're about to explode. Margaret sighed and explained the entire situation to him. Kyle listened intently, munching on his popcorn. When she finished, he grinned. Well, that's definitely a mess. But hey, maybe we can turn it around. How? Margaret asked skeptically. Social media, Kyle said confidently. Everyone loves a funny story, especially when it involves celebrities. We post about what happened, explain how you're trying to fix it, and let the community help spread the word. People will rally behind you, trust me. Margaret hesitated. She wasn't exactly tech-savvy, and the idea of putting herself out there online made her nervous. But desperate times called for desperate measures. All right, she said finally. Show me what to do. Kyle grabbed his laptop and set it up on the dining table. Together they drafted a light-hearted post explaining the mix-up and asking for support in retrieving the car. They included photos of the Charger, taken earlier, by Margaret, and tagged the film's official social media accounts. Within minutes of posting, comments started pouring in, some teasing, others supportive. Word spread quickly and soon the post went viral locally. By midnight, Margaret received a call from someone claiming to be part of the film crew. They sounded relieved to hear from her and promised to send over the necessary documents first thing in the morning. Margaret thanked them profusely, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since the detectives showed up at her door. Exhausted but determined, Margaret went to bed that night knowing she still had a long road ahead. But she also realized that sometimes even the best intentions could lead to unexpected complications, and that solving problems often required creativity, humility, and a little bit of help from others. The next morning, Margaret woke up feeling a mix of dread and determination. She had spent most of the night tossing and turning, thinking about the black Charger and how she could fix the mess she'd unintentionally created. The film crews promised to send over documents gave her some hope, but she knew there was still a lot to do before the car could be returned. Time was running out, and every hour that passed made her feel more anxious. After a quick breakfast, Margaret called Frank Miller again to check on the status of the car. As expected, he hadn't heard anything from the film crew or anyone else claiming ownership of the vehicle. I told you, Margaret, Frank said firmly. Without proper paperwork, I can't release it, you understand, right? Margaret sighed but nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Yes, Frank, I get it, but trust me, we're working on getting the documents as fast as possible. Just please hold on to the car until then. I'll do what I can, Frank replied, his tone softening slightly. But don't wait too long. My lot isn't exactly secure and I don't want any trouble. Hanging up, Margaret felt a renewed sense of urgency. She needed to take matters into her own hands. Kyle, who had stayed over the night before, noticed her pacing and offered to help. Why don't we go to the towing lot ourselves, he suggested. If we talk to Frank in person and explain everything again, maybe he'll budge. Margaret hesitated. Driving all the way to Frank's lot wasn't ideal. It was located on the outskirts of town, but she realized it might be their best option. All right, she said finally. Let's do it. Before heading out, Margaret decided to stop by Linda Harper's house to see if anyone else in the neighborhood could lend a hand. Linda greeted her warmly, Max wagging his tail beside her. When Margaret explained the situation, Linda immediately offered to come along. You shouldn't have to deal with this alone, she said kindly. Besides, Joe Ramirez might be able to help too. Joe Ramirez was a mechanic who lived a few streets away. He was known for his willingness to assist neighbors with car troubles and had a reputation for being resourceful. Margaret agreed that having Joe on their side could only help, so they stopped by his garage next. Joe listened intently as Margaret recounted the story, nodding thoughtfully. This sounds like quite the pickle, Joe said with a chuckle. But I'm happy to tag along. Maybe I can sweet-talk Frank into letting us take a look at the car. With Kyle, Linda, and Joe now part of the team, Margaret felt a little less overwhelmed. They piled into Joe's old but reliable pickup truck and set off toward Frank's towing lot. The drive was quiet except for Kyle scrolling through social media updates on his phone. The post Margaret had made the night before had gained even more traction, with comments pouring in from locals offering support and advice. When they arrived at the lot, Frank greeted them with a raised eyebrow. You brought reinforcements? He asked, half amused. We're here to sort this out once and for all, Margaret said firmly. Please, Frank, just hear us out. Frank crossed his arms but didn't object. Margaret explained the situation, again, emphasizing how important the car was to the film production and how much effort she'd put into fixing the mistake. Linda chimed in, praising Margaret for her dedication to the community, while Joe added that he'd personally vouch for the safe return of the car if anything went wrong. Frank scratched his chin, clearly torn. Look, I get it, he said after a pause. But my business has rules for a reason. If word gets out that I let cars go without proper documentation, it could hurt my reputation. Kyle stepped forward then, holding up his phone. What if we show you proof? People are already talking about this online. The film crew is aware of what happened, and they're sending over the papers. Plus, the whole neighborhood is rooting for you to make an exception this one time. Frank glanced at the screen where dozens of supportive comments were visible. For a moment, he seemed to soften. Finally, he let out a sigh. All right, fine. But only because I know you guys mean, well, let me see the car one last time and then you can take it, if you promise to handle the rest. Relieved, Margaret thanked him profusely. Joe volunteered to inspect the car quickly to ensure nothing had been damaged during the towing process. Satisfied that everything was in order, they prepared to leave the lot. As they drove back toward Hillside Oaks, Kyle received a call from someone claiming to represent the film crew. It turned out they were already en route to retrieve the car. Margaret instructed Kyle to give them directions to meet halfway at a nearby gas station. By the time they pulled into the station, a van emblazoned with the movie's logo was waiting. 2 men stepped out, both dressed casually but carrying clipboards. One introduced himself as Greg, the assistant director, while the other was Mike, a production coordinator. They shook hands with Margaret and her group, expressing gratitude for their efforts to resolve the issue. We really appreciate this, Greg said sincerely. That car is crucial for tomorrow's shoot, and losing it would have caused major headaches. Thanks to you, we're back on track. Margaret blushed, still embarrassed by the whole ordeal. I'm so sorry for the mix-up. I honestly had no idea it was part of your production. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do to make up for it. Greg smiled. No harm done. In fact, this might end up being great publicity for the movie. Everyone loves a funny story. While the men loaded the Charger onto a trailer, Joe struck up a conversation with them about cars and filming equipment. Linda chatted with Mike about the local area, suggesting scenic spots they could use for future shots. Even Kyle managed to snag a selfie with Greg, which he immediately posted online with the caption, "Crisis averted." By the time the crew left, Margaret felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The immediate crisis was over, but she knew the incident would leave a lasting impression, not just on her but on the entire neighborhood. Word of the towed police car had spread far beyond Hillside Oaks, thanks in part to Kyle's viral post. Locals joked about Margaret's strictness, but many also praised her for handling the situation with grace and determination. That evening, as Margaret sat on her porch watching the sunset, Linda joined her with a plate of freshly baked cookies. "You did good today," Linda said, handing her one. "Not everyone would have gone to such lengths to fix a mistake." Margaret took a bite of the cookie and smiled faintly. "I just hope people remember that I was trying to do the right thing, even if it didn't turn out perfectly." They will, Linda assured her. "And who knows, maybe Vin Diesel will show up here someday to thank you personally." Margaret laughed at the thought. Now that would be something. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Margaret reflected on the day's events. What started as a simple misunderstanding had turned into an adventure involving her neighbors, a towing company, and a Hollywood film crew. While she wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, she couldn't deny that it brought the community closer together and taught her a valuable lesson about flexibility and communication. For the first time in hours, Margaret allowed herself to relax. The Charger was back where it belonged, the film crew was happy, and Hillside Oaks remained the peaceful, quirky neighborhood she loved. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. The days following the towing incident passed quickly, but the story of Margaret Dawson and the towed police car continued to ripple through Hillside Oaks. Neighbors greeted Margaret with knowing smiles, some teasing her gently about her run-in with Hollywood, while others praised her for handling the situation so well. Despite the initial embarrassment, Margaret found herself feeling oddly proud of how things had turned out. The mix-up had brought the community together in unexpected ways, and she couldn't help but notice that people seemed friendlier than ever before. One afternoon, as Margaret was watering the flowers in her front yard, a delivery truck pulled up outside her house. Curious, she set down the watering can and walked over to see what it was. The driver handed her a large envelope addressed simply to Margaret Dawson, HOA President Extraordinaire. She raised an eyebrow, but thanked him warmly before heading inside to open it. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note and several glossy photos. The note read, "Dear Margaret, we wanted to thank you again for your hard work in resolving the mix-up with our car. You and your neighbors truly went above and beyond, and we couldn't have asked for better hosts during our time in Hillside Oaks. Enclosed are a few pictures from the film set, including one with Vin Diesel himself. We hope these bring a smile to your face. Maybe someday you'll come visit us on set. Best wishes, Greg and the crew." Margaret's eyes widened as she flipped through the photos. There were shots of the cast and crew working behind the scenes, candid moments of laughter and teamwork, and even a close-up of Vin Diesel leaning casually against the black Charger. But the final photo made her gasp. It showed Vin Diesel standing beside the Charger holding a sign that read, "Thanks, Margaret." His signature grin was unmistakable. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the picture. She couldn't believe it. Vin Diesel had actually acknowledged her role in the whole fiasco, and not just acknowledged it, but turned it into something positive. For a moment, she felt like a star herself. Word of the photos spread quickly once Margaret shared them with Linda Harper, who immediately posted them on the neighborhood's social media page. Comments flooded in, with residents marveling at the surreal turn of events. Some joked that Margaret should start charging for autographs, while others suggested framing the photos and hanging them in the HOA office. Kyle, always eager to capitalize on the attention, created a meme featuring Margaret and Vin Diesel side by side with the caption, "When life gives you lemons, trade them for movie stars." But the surprises didn't stop there. A few days later, Margaret received another package, this time containing a DVD labeled Special Screening, Hillside Oaks Edition. Inside was a copy of the movie the crew had been filming, along with a note inviting her and the residents to host a private viewing party. The film wasn't due to hit theaters for months, so having an early screening was a rare treat. Excited by the idea, Margaret organized the event at the local community center. She worked tirelessly to transform the space into a mini cinema, complete with popcorn, soda, and string lights hung across the ceiling. On the night of the screening, nearly everyone in Hillside Oaks showed up, eager to see their small town featured on the big screen. As the lights dimmed and the opening credits rolled, Margaret sat in the front row, surrounded by her neighbors. When the first scene appeared, a sweeping shot of Hillside Oaks' tree-lined streets, applause erupted throughout the room. People cheered and whistled, pointing out familiar landmarks and houses. Even Joe Ramirez stood up to shout, "That's my garage!" when a brief shot of his workshop flashed on screen. The highlight of the evening came during a pivotal chase sequence involving the Black Charger. As Vin Diesel sped through the streets of Hillside Oaks, performing jaw-dropping stunts, the audience erupted into cheers. Margaret couldn't help but laugh when she saw a quick cameo of the neighborhood park, where Linda's dog Max could be seen trotting happily in the background. After the movie ended, the crowd lingered, buzzing with excitement. Greg, the assistant director, had surprised everyone by showing up in person to answer questions about the film. He regaled the audience with stories from the set, including how the crew had nicknamed Margaret the Guardian of Hillside Oaks, after learning about her dedication to enforcing HOA rules. "It's people like Margaret who remind us why filming in real neighborhoods is so special," Greg said with a grin. "You guys gave us a warm welcome, even if it started with a little drama." The comment earned laughs and applause, and Margaret felt her cheeks flush with pride. It was clear that the experience had left a lasting impression on both the filmmakers and the residents of Hillside Oaks. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood embraced its newfound connection to Hollywood. Linda Harper started a petition to rename Maple Lane Vin Diesel Drive, though it was ultimately vetoed by the city council. Joe Ramirez painted a mural on the side of his garage depicting the Charger mid-drift, much to the delight of passers-by. And Margaret? Well, she became a local celebrity of sorts, often stopped by neighbors who wanted to hear the full story or ask if she'd heard from Vin Diesel again. Though the excitement eventually died down, Margaret found herself reflecting on the lessons she'd learned from the ordeal. She realized that being strict wasn't always the best approach, that sometimes flexibility and understanding could lead to better outcomes. At the next HOA meeting, she proposed creating a new policy to accommodate visitors and temporary permits, ensuring that nothing like this would happen again. Her suggestion was met with overwhelming support, and the policy was implemented shortly thereafter. Residents appreciated the change, noting that it made the neighborhood feel more welcoming without sacrificing its charm. One crisp autumn morning, as Margaret took her usual walk through Hillside Oaks, she noticed something different. Near the entrance of the development stood a shiny new sign that read, "Welcome to Hillside Oaks, home of stars big and small." Beneath it was a smaller plaque featuring a photo of Margaret shaking hands with Vin Diesel, the same one that now hung proudly in the HOA office. Smiling to herself, Margaret paused to take it all in. What had started as a simple mistake had blossomed into something extraordinary. The incident had taught her, and the entire neighborhood, that even the smallest actions could have big consequences, and while she still believed in the importance of rules, she also understood that life was full of surprises, and sometimes those surprises were worth embracing. As she continued her walk, waving to neighbors and admiring the colorful leaves falling from the trees, Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude. Hillside Oaks wasn't just a place, it was a community, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, She knew they would face them together. The weeks turned into months, and life in Hillside Oaks slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The excitement of the film crew's visit and the unexpected brush with fame began to fade, but the impact of those events lingered in subtle ways. Margaret Dawson noticed small changes around the neighborhood, neighbors greeting each other more warmly, new families moving in who had heard about the movie star town, and even a fresh coat of paint on the community center's walls, funded by donations from grateful residents. Margaret herself had changed too. She was still as dedicated to her role as HOA president as ever, but she carried herself differently now. Her clipboard was always close at hand, and her daily walks through the streets remained a staple of her routine. However, there was a newfound lightness to her step, a softness in her voice when she spoke to people. She had learned that enforcing rules didn't mean being inflexible. Sometimes bending a little could lead to better outcomes for everyone. 1. Chilly December morning. As Margaret bundled up in her favorite wool coat and scarf, she decided to take a longer route on her walk. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and holiday decorations adorned nearly every house. Wreaths hung on doors, lights twinkled in windows, and inflatable snowmen swayed gently in the breeze. It was a reminder of how much she loved this place. The quiet charm, the sense of belonging, the shared joy of simple moments. As she passed Joe Ramirez's garage, she spotted him outside, tinkering with an old truck. He waved and called out, "Morning, Margaret. Want some coffee?" "Sure," she replied, stepping inside the cozy space. Joe's garage was always warm, thanks to a small heater humming in the corner. A pot of coffee brewed on a hot plate, filling the room with its rich aroma. Margaret accepted a mug gratefully, savoring the heat as it spread through her hands. "You know," Joe said, leaning against his workbench, "people are still talking about that movie. Linda told me her grandkids keep asking if Vin Diesel is coming back for Christmas." Margaret chuckled. "I wouldn't be surprised if they expected him to show up pulling a sleigh." Joe laughed, shaking his head. "Seriously though, you did good, Margaret. That whole thing could have gone sideways, but you handled it like a pro." She smiled modestly, stirring her coffee. "It wasn't just me. Everyone pitched in. Linda, Kyle, Frank, even the film crew. I couldn't have done it alone." "That's true," Joe agreed. "But it takes someone special to admit when they're wrong and work to fix it. You earned a lot of respect that day." Margaret felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. She didn't think of herself as extraordinary, but hearing Joe's words made her realize how far she'd come since that fateful afternoon when she'd called to have the charger towed. After finishing her drink, Margaret thanked Joe and continued her walk. As she strolled past the park where filming had taken place, she paused to watch children playing on the swings and climbing the jungle gym. The memory of Vin Diesel speeding through these same streets brought a smile to her face. Who would have thought that a Hollywood action star would leave such a lasting mark on their little corner of the world? Her thoughts drifted to the framed photo sitting in her living room, the one of her shaking hands with Vin Diesel. It had become a conversation piece whenever friends or neighbors visited. Some joked that she should frame it in gold, while others teased her about becoming a celebrity. Margaret found it amusing, but deep down she cherished the photo, not because of who was in it, but because of what it represented: resilience, teamwork, and the power of community. When she reached the end of her walk, Margaret stopped by the HOA office to check on a few things. Inside, the secretary, Carol Bennett, greeted her with a cheerful smile. "Mail came for you today," Carol said, handing over a small stack of envelopes. Most were bills or notices, but one caught Margaret's eye: a plain white envelope, with no return address. Curious, she opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note and a glossy photograph. The note read, "Dear Margaret, happy holidays. Thought you might enjoy this picture from our latest project. Looks like we're sticking with cars, and maybe Hillside Oaks will make another appearance someday. Thanks again for everything. You're officially part of the team. Best, Vin." The photograph showed Vin Diesel standing next to a brand new sports car, grinning broadly. In the background, a sign read Hillside Oaks in bold letters. Margaret stared at the image, her heart swelling with disbelief and delight. She couldn't believe he had taken the time to send her something so personal. Word of the letter spread quickly once Margaret shared it with Carol, who insisted on making copies for the bulletin board. By the time Margaret left the office, half the neighborhood knew about it. People stopped her on the street to congratulate her, and Linda Harper even suggested organizing a holiday party in Vin's honor. Though nothing came of the idea, the buzz added to the festive spirit already filling the air. When the annual Hillside Oaks Winter Festival rolled around, Margaret found herself busier than ever helping organize games, food stalls, and a tree lighting ceremony. This year, the event felt extra special, as if the entire community was celebrating not just the season, but their shared connection to something bigger. On the night of the festival, Margaret stood near the stage, watching as families gathered around the towering Christmas tree. Children laughed as they chased each other through the crowd, and couples held hands under blankets to ward off the cold. The mayor gave a short speech, praising Hillside Oaks for its strong sense of unity, and thanking Margaret for her leadership. When it was time to light the tree, Margaret stepped forward holding a large switch connected to the lights. As she flipped it, the tree erupted into a dazzling display of colors, earning cheers and applause from the crowd. Fireworks lit up the sky moments later, casting a golden glow over the happy faces below. As the evening wound down, Margaret wandered through the festival grounds, taking in the sights and sounds. She stopped by a booth selling hot cocoa and bought 2 cups, one for herself and one for Linda, who was chatting animatedly with a group of friends nearby. When Margaret handed her the cup, Linda grinned. "You know," Linda said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "I think this has been the best year yet, all thanks to you." Margaret shook her head, embarrassed. "It's not just me. Everyone played a part." "Well, whatever it is, don't change," Linda said with a wink. "We need more people like you." Later that night, as Margaret sat by her fireplace flipping through the photos from the festival, she reflected on the journey she'd been on. From the chaos of towing the wrong car to the joy of seeing her community come together, every moment had shaped her in ways she never expected. She realized that life was unpredictable, full of twists and turns that couldn't always be controlled, but that was what made it beautiful. Margaret glanced at the framed photo of Vin Diesel one last time before heading to bed. She smiled softly, feeling grateful for the lessons she'd learned and the memories she'd made. Hillside Oaks was more than just a neighborhood. It was a home, a family, and a testament to the strength of human connection. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Margaret knew she would face them with the same determination and heart that had carried her this far.